So let's also look at some DNS server options. So I'm going to right click this time on my DNS server here and go to properties. Now I've got my configure a DNS server here, which is a little wizard that walks you through creating a lookup zone or creating forward and let me try this again. Creating a forward lookup zone, creating forward and reverse lookup zones, or configuring root hints. Um, Rather than going through the wizard, let's just go straight to the properties, which is here. And we're going to take a look at a couple of things specifically. So we'll touch on some of these other things later, but at the moment I want to look at the interfaces tab, the advanced tab, and the root hints tab. So in the interfaces tab, we set the IP addresses that we want this server to listen on. So this really becomes an issue if you have a multi-homed computer. So you have a server that's running multiple network connections, it's multi-homed. Then you can choose to allow the DNS server to only listen to specific IP addresses. Its default is to listen on all. But if you only want some, then you just select that and click the IP addresses that you want. So in a multi-homed environment, that might be the case, where we want it only listening for DNS requests on one network and not on another one. Now, in the Advanced tab, we have a couple of things here that we want to look at. And that's these three server options right here that are already checked. We have enable round robin, enable netmask ordering, and secure cache against pollution. Now, this bottom one, secure cache against pollution, that's a security option. Basically, we want to make sure that our DNS server cache doesn't get corrupted and we don't start giving out false information. DNS pollution is something that attackers will do sometimes when they're attacking a network. Now, round robin and netmask ordering have to do with how do we resolve it if we have somebody look up a name, and try to resolve a name, but there's more than one resolution. So, for example, I might have multiple web servers that I create for load balancing, and they all could operate under the name www. So because I don't want people having to guess which web server they should access based on, what time of day it is or something like that. That's going to get chaotic. So what we do is we create a single name with multiple possible resolutions. And then what round robin does is it responds with a different IP address, a different resolution every single time. So it will kind of load balance for us. The first person requests www.basset.local and they get server 1. Second person requests www.basset.local, they get a response from server 2. And then third one gets a response from server 3. And fourth one gets a response from server 1. And fifth one gets a response from server 2. So we're round robining this. Now, netmask ordering is a way of structuring that a little bit better. So we'll still enable different responses, but we try to respond with the one that's closest to the IP address of the client. So if we have our servers with different IP addresses because they're in different parts of the country or parts of the world, then with netmask ordering, we'll try to respond with the server that's closest to the client. That's what those are. And those are default options. And we'll typically leave those on. Sometimes we don't even realize they're there. But we'll typically leave those on because that gives us some of that capability automatically. Even if we don't use it, it doesn't. If we don't have multiple servers, it's not a big deal to go ahead and allow those options. Now, the other tab I want to point out to you is root hints. So root hints, this is again default, this is predefined. And what root hints do is they point us, or they allow our server to find or to forward requests for things that it doesn't have in its zones. So, for example, this server gets a request. This server owns a zone basset.local. So if it gets a request for something from basset.local, it will respond with what it has in its zone records. But what if it gets a request for Microsoft.com? Well, I don't have a zone here for Microsoft.com. I don't want to maintain Microsoft's DNS records. So what we'll do is we will use our root hints to connect to root DNS servers and request the information for Microsoft.com from those root DNS servers. And if you remember the lookup process correctly, the client, when it goes to look up Microsoft.com, it will look up in its own cache. If it can't find it, it will go to its DNS server. The DNS server will receive the query, look in its cache. If it doesn't find it, it'll look in its zone records. If it doesn't find it, then it'll send to the root hint server, and the root hint server will say, this is who owns Microsoft.com. This is a name server, an NS for Microsoft.com. And then our DNS server will request from the name server for Microsoft.com, which looks up the address in its cache. If it doesn't find it, looks it up in its zone records, sends it back to us. Our DNS server, this one that we just used root hints on, will then store it in our cache for a while, and then forward it back to the client as well, who then stores it in their cache and then connects to the server for Microsoft.com. But the root hints, we really don't play with them a whole lot. They're here. We know they're here. They work. That's great. We don't need to do anything. I just wanted to make sure you knew that they were here. So your clients then can use this DNS server, and then they don't have to have a link to a public DNS server configured for them, because this one using root hints will go out and resolve those public names for them anyway. Okay, so that should give you these last several videos should give you a brief introduction to setting up and configuring DNS using Windows Server.